all, in this unit, we said that we'll discuss all macroeconomic variables, right? So macroeconomics is different from microeconomics, as we know that macroeconomics looks at issues that are affecting the entire economy, right? So unlike microeconomics, right, which only deals with one market at a time, one sector at a time, macroeconomics deal with issues that are related to entire economy, right? And within this, I said that we'll talk about the GDP, which we have already covered, right? So the first topic that we discussed within unit 4, macroeconomics, was GDP. Now we are doing inflation. After this, we'll come to exchange rate, right? Then we'll talk about balance of payments, right? So these are macroeconomic variables. GDP, inflation, unemployment is also a macroeconomic variable, but as I said, we'll not discuss this in AS since this is part of our A2 syllabus, right? So unemployment, exchange rate, and balance of payments, right? Is this clear? Okay. Now, so far within inflation, we have discussed a couple of different, things, and we'll do a quick recap in today's class before we will move forward. Okay. And the fifth one is balance of payments. Fifth one is balance of payments. So we'll discuss balance of payments, right? Okay. Now, what is inflation? We have so far talked about inflation, that inflation is persistent increase in general price level. So when prices of goods and services on average are increasing, that's known as inflation. Then we discussed that what causes inflation in an economy, right? That's the big question, that what causes inflation. Now, if you remember this, we said that there are 3 causes of inflation: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and monetary inflation. Now, what is demand pull inflation? Demand pull inflation is, simply speaking, increase in aggregate demand, right? So when aggregate demand increases, that results in rightward shift in aggregate demand, which results in higher general price level. So that's known as demand pull inflation. Then another cause of inflation is cost push inflation, right? What is cost push inflation? That is when the cost of production of an economy, starts rising, and that's because of, let's say, that could be because of different reasons. Let's say raw material is becoming more expensive, or let's say your exchange rate is becoming weaker. And when your exchange rate becomes weaker, so whatever raw material you're importing from other countries, that will cost you more, resulting in higher inflation and so on, right? So that is cost push inflation. And then the third cause of inflation is monetary inflation. What is monetary inflation? This happens when the central bank of an economy prints too much money supply, which means that more money becomes available to citizens, and therefore they start demanding more goods and services. So when more money starts chasing fewer goods and services, that also results in inflation. So this type of inflation is known as monetary inflation, right? So we also discussed this in detail. Then in the last class, students, we talked about how inflation is calculated. So we'll not do a detailed recap of how inflation is calculated, but I'll just very quickly walk you through the steps that are involved in calculating inflation. So do you remember what were the steps involved? How is inflation calculated? Do you guys remember? What are the 4 steps, right? Or just what are the steps inflation calculated? Okay, now the first step is, right. Right. So class timings, Zuhan, we have brought the class timings back to the original time, which was 9 to 9:45. But what we'll do in upcoming few classes, that we will have longer sessions, right? And why is that important? So let me tell you, I might not have told you guys before, I'm getting married in the second week of February, right? So I might be taking a few days off. I do realize that it's really, close towards your exams and everything. So that's why I want to cover as much as we can, right? For the few days that I'll be taking off, right? And yeah, but don't worry, it will not be more than 4 or 5 days maximum, I'm telling you, right? But even then, to make up for those, thank you, Zohan, right? But even to make up for those missed classes, I want to cover more syllabus before my break, right? Is this good? Okay, so students, have a look at this. How is inflation calculated? Yes, so the first step is very, very correct, right? So you do identify a base year. I'll tell you what base year is and why is that important, right? So the first thing is identifying basket of goods and services, um, right, which affect the cost of living, right? Identify basket of goods and services. Now, what is this basket of goods and services? So these goods and services are products that a typical consumer consumes, right? So what is inflation? In a way, inflation is cost of living. How much is the rise in cost of living? That is your inflation, right? So to calculate that rise in cost of living, you need to know what are some, what are the products that a typical consumer consumes, so that you record change in their prices, and that is what will give you a rise in the cost of living. Are you getting right? So the first step is to identify a basket of goods and services, right? The second is record two set of prices, right? So what basically uh, it is that record two set of prices. What was the price at the start of the period and what's the price at the end of the period, right? Record two set of prices, right? Then assign weights. What's this? So in this, what you do, that you assign weights to different products based on their importance, right? So some products I told you are more important compared to other products, and therefore those products will get a higher weights compared to other products. Assign weights. And the fourth is calculate, perform the calculations, right? Now, perform the calculation. Okay. Now, if you remember, we did a detailed, example of how inflation is calculated. So we identified 4 or 5 products like food, electricity, and so on and so forth. But I did tell you that in real CPI calculation, so what's the method that's used to calculate inflation? It's called consumer price index, CPI, consumer price index, right? So actual CPI calculation of a country involves 600, 700 products, right? So I mean, just you can imagine how much detailed calculation that is, right? Then what it means to record two set of prices. So basically think about this. Inflation is change in prices. So if you're calculating the change in prices over a year, then what you will do is basically you will record product prices, right, that are part of your basket of goods on 1st January, let's say if that's for 1 year. So 2021 has just passed. So if you are calculating inflation for 1 year, so you will record prices of each of these products on 1st January 2021 and on 31st December 2021, right? But it's not always the case that you record or you calculate inflation for a year. You can calculate it for 3 months, you can calculate it for 6 months. So depending upon that, you will have your starting date and your ending date, right? Or your starting price and your ending price, right? Okay. Now then assigning weights was pretty simple and easy, right? So what we said that weights are always assigned out of 100. So whichever products take a bigger proportion of consumers' income. So food is a very basic necessity. Everyone consumes food, and a big proportion of consumers' income is spent on food. So that will take a bigger that will make more of your weights in CPI calculation, whereas other things like, let's say internet charges. Now, internet is also kind of common, but still not everyone uses that much internet, right? Or let's say 4G charges. Let's be more specific, right? So for that, that thing will be given lower weights compared to food. Food is basic necessity. Everyone needs it, right? 4G, still we can argue that it's not that much of a need, and that will be assigned lower weights. Are you getting me? So weights are assigned on the basis of need, which is determined by the proportion of income spent on a product by consumers, right? So if consumers spend a bigger proportion of their income on a product, that will be assigned higher weights. And if something is taking a smaller proportion of consumers' income, that will be assigned smaller, lesser weights, right? Easy, we good on this? Okay. And then you finally do the calculation. Okay. Now what Zohan was saying, base year. Now students, think about this. Now the significance of base year is to have a period for comparison, right? Now, if I say base year is 2010, right? Let's say, right? So if I say base year was 2010 and current year is, let's say, we are in 2021. Let's say 2021 has just passed by. So if I say that during this time, inflation in Pakistan has been, let's say, 150%. What did I say? That inflation in Pakistan during this time period has been 150%. Now, what it means is that compared to base year, right? Compared to base year, today prices are 150% higher. I repeat, right? So base year is the year that you're keeping as a benchmark, or you're keeping that year as the benchmark from where you will compare the change, right? So if base year, let's say in any calculation is 2010, and current year, as we know, let's say 2021 has just passed. So if I say that during these 11 years, there has been 150% increase in prices, right? Then it means that whatever prices were in 2010, now prices are 150% higher of that. So if something was worth, now this is interesting, if something was worth 100 rupees in 2010, can any one of you tell me what will be its price in 2021? If something was worth 100 rupees in 2010, what is its price in 2021? Correct. Very good. That's correct, right? So all you had to do was to calculate 150% higher of that, right? So simply speaking, right, you just do it like this gets canceled out, and that will give you 250. So if something was worth 100 rupees in 2010, now it's worth 250 rupees. Easy. We good on this, students? So that's the significance of a base year, right? That you need to have a year with which you will compare the prices with. Okay, are we good on this? Okay. Now, students, today we'll do a very important topic, that's cost of inflation, right? Now, before we come to what are different problems or challenges associated with inflation, we need to understand what are different types of inflation, right? Because that will really help you understand that what are different types of inflation and which of these types is more problematic for an economy, right? Now, first thing before we move on, right? Inflation is low and stable rate of inflation is desirable for an economy, right? Students, can you see my screen? Right? So let's do it like this. I was thinking of over here because that way I can, share these notes with you for your revision towards your exam. Okay. Now, what are different types of inflation, right? So the first one is low and stable rate of inflation, right? Got it? Okay. Now, the first one is uh, stable rate of inflation, right? Now, what exactly this is, why is this beneficial? We'll talk about this. That's the first one, right? Then it is another type of inflation is known as accelerating rate of inflation. We'll look at this, right? Then there is uh, disinflation, right? Which can also be called as decelerating inflation, right? Um, uh, right? Then you have deflation, right? And yeah, that's pretty much about it. Okay, now students, think about this. What are hyperinflation? Yes, sorry, my bad. Yes, correct. So hyperinflation. Okay, now students, think about this. So these are different types of inflation, and we'll talk about each one of these. So let's first talk about the very first one, which is low and stable rate of inflation. Now, how do we define a low rate? Now, usually economists define any low rate to be anything as a single digit, right? Now think about this. So as long as inflation of an economy, the rate of inflation in an economy is anything less between 0 to 9%, they define it as low rate, right? Single digit, right? Because 10 is double digit, so anything less than 10, which means 9 or lower, would be a low rate. Okay. Now, another thing that's important over here, students, that what is stable rate? Stable rate is basically, right, that doesn't fluctuate a lot. That's kind of steady, right? Yeah, that's kind of steady. Exactly. So if I have to show you a quick graph so that you get a better idea, right? So if, let's say, there is this graph of inflation with time on the x-axis and inflation rate on the y-axis, right? So you have, let's say, inflation rate on the y-axis, and you have time that could be in months or years or whatever, right? On the x-axis, right? So then let's say it's kind of, you know, it's kind of, it might be increasing slowly, or it might be, slowly going down, but there isn't a lot of fluctuations. Are you getting me? Right? So let's say this was 3%, and let's say this is somewhat 4%. So you can see every year it's kind of somewhere between 3 to 4%, right? Not like, going like this or something like this, right? Not a lot of fluctuations. Is it making sense? So this is what low and stable rate of inflation means, right? Now, why is low and stable rate of inflation desirable? Let me tell you, that's the first thing that you should know. As it encourages investment. Okay, now students, think about this. Why would I say that low and stable rate of inflation encourages investment, right? Now, the idea is pretty simple. Think about this. So when inflation takes place, think of it from producer's point of view. It increases the supply, suppliers get motivated by exactly, excellent, Zohan, that's correct, right? Students, think about this. When prices are increasing, think if Mega Lecture next year gets to charge higher prices for its same, same online courses that we are providing, or similarly, if a clothing brand starts charging higher prices for the same products, right, and the cost of production is the same, and prices are increasing, so what will that do? That will increase your profit margins, yes or no? So higher prices means higher profit margins for the producers, yes or no? Now with that happening, how will producers respond to it? How will producers respond to it? Do you remember the graph for aggregate supply? What was the graph for aggregate supply? Aggregate supply is upward sloping, which shows that higher the general price level is on your y-axis, and your general price level is on your y-axis, and what is on the x-axis? Aggregate supply, right? And think about this. When prices are increasing, which means on average goods and services are becoming more expensive, that shows higher profits for the producers, and that encourages them to produce more. So there will be extension in aggregate supply with higher general price level, and therefore it means more production in the economy. Is that beneficial or not? What do you think? Because think about this, when aggregate supply will increase, obviously, overall there will be higher GDP. There will be higher GDP since more output is being produced. Obviously, that's beneficial for an economy. Students, are you getting me? So why is low and stable? Because think about this. Why a very high rate of inflation is not desirable? I'll tell you why. Because then prices have risen so much that consumers reduce their demand. Think about this, students. So if, let's say, a rate of inflation, let's take a specific value. Let's say if rate of inflation in an economy is 3%. Now, what it means is basically if something was worth 100 rupees at the start of the year, it will be 103 rupees at the end of the year. Do you think it's too much of a change for consumers to, to be bothered with in 1 year? Right? So if 1 year rate of inflation was 3%, my question to you is this too much of a change for consumers to be concerned about? Yes, no? Come on, students. Is this too much of a change or not that much of a change? Right? Exactly. Will increase so they don't mind. Exactly, right? So this is not a big change. Are you getting me? So that means that consumers will most probably not reduce their, like they will not cut on their spending. Since the increase in price is not that much, consumers will not be much bothered about it, and therefore they will not cut on their consumption. Is making sense? However, if this rate of inflation would have been high enough, let's say 15%, and anything that was worth 100 rupees at the start of the year becomes 115 at the end of the year. Now, this could be a bigger change, right? This could be a big change for consumers to cut on their consumption. So that's why I said that when rate of inflation is low and stable, right? Consumers do not cut on their spending, right? Prices are increasing, which means higher profit margins for the producers. So they produce more, which means extension in aggregate supply, right? Therefore, producers will produce more. Overall, there will be more output, and more output, more GDP for the country. And, that's a beneficial thing for an economy, right? Is everyone getting this, right? So what is low and stable rate of inflation? This, right? This type of inflation is desirable for an economy as it encourages investments. Why so? Higher prices increase suppliers' profit margins, which encourages them to expand their on. Therefore, as the result, it G it um okay, investment. Students, is it making sense? Right? So think about this. So how low and stable rate of inflation encourages investment? Higher prices increase suppliers' profit margins, which encourages them to expand their operations. Now think about this. How will Mega Lecture or any business respond to higher prices, right? Since each unit will be more profitable, we will want to expand our operations. We would want to expand our capacity. We will want to hire more teachers, expand our scale, because we can afford to do that with higher profits and all that, right? And therefore, when investment increases, we know what will that do. That will generate more employment, because obviously to expand, you need more employees to look after your operations, which results in higher employment, lower unemployment, right? And higher GDP and things like that, right? So that's why it's beneficial. Okay. Now, what is accelerating rate of inflation, students? So accelerating means that each year the rate of inflation is higher than what is in the previous year. Now think about this, just like you know what acceleration means, right? So if we are looking at, we are looking at any country's data and we are looking at its inflation rates over the years, right? So accelerating rate of inflation would be something which, where every year the rate of inflation is higher than previous year, right? So think about it. If in 2015, let's say it was 8%, then next year it will be something more than 8%, let's say 8.5%. And then the next year it will be even higher, right? Let's say 9.2%. And then let's say 10%, and then let's say 11%, and then so on and so forth. Students, are you getting me? So accelerating, the rate of inflation is accelerating, it's increasing. Yes or no? Is it making sense? Is everyone clear on this? Right? Okay. Now, is this a good thing? No, obviously no. Why? Because think about this. Every year, the rate of inflation, firstly, it's not stable. Now think about this. Let me tell you another thing. Why is stable rate of inflation, desirable? Because it helps consumers and producers with their planning. How many of you got this point, right? Now, stable rate of inflation is beneficial for an economy, right? Because it helps businesses and consumers as it helps consumers and producers with their planning. Now, what do I mean by that? Think about this. If every year you know for a fact, or not for a fact, but every year if you can predict relatively, accurately, that how much will be the rise in the price level, right? Then you know that if you're saving this much income, then how much will it lose its value over 1 year or things like that. Students, are you getting me? Right? Similarly, when businesses do their planning, right, they also need to know that how much will be the rise in prices, so that they can make their decisions accordingly, right? Now, if Mega Lecture knows for a fact that next year prices will be 5% higher, then we know that our rent will be 5% higher. The raw material, like let's say the stationery items that we might be buying, that will be 5%. Those will be 5% expensive. The wages that we'll be paying to our workers will be 5% higher, and things like that, right? Electricity expenses will be 5% higher. So when we price our products, we will be more accurate in making our decisions, right? Because we have done accurate calculation of how much rise in prices will be. Students, are you getting me? Similarly, if you think from consumer point of view, right? And I know that the rate of inflation is kind of stable in Pakistan, let's say 5%, 6%, whatever, but stable, right? It doesn't fluctuate a lot. Then I can estimate that if I save some money over 1 year, that during that time period, how much my money will lose its value and things like that, right? So it really makes your planning easier and so on, right? and that's a big advantage, right? So that's why stable rate of inflation is desirable. So coming back to the point, why is accelerating rate of inflation not desirable? Because it's not stable. Are you getting me? Firstly, it's increasing every year. There will be much greater increase in the prices, which means consumers purchasing power will erode at a greater rate. Yes or no? Consumers purchasing power will erode at a greater pace. And secondly, it will make it difficult for consumers and producers to plan. You know, got it? It cause shoe leather. Yeah, we are coming to the cost. Yes, we are coming to the cost right now. We're just defining. Yes, yes, that's correct. That's correct. Right. Okay. Accelerating inflation. Are you getting this? You following? It makes it difficult for users to plan. This is good. Okay. Now the next one is disinflation or decelerating rate of inflation. Now think about this. Decelerating. Now the idea is it will be opposite of accelerating rate of inflation. Students, have a look at this. So in this case, can you would you see that each year the rate of inflation was higher? Now in the case of deaccelerating or disinflation, the rate of inflation every year will be lower, right? So if let's say in 2015 it was the same as 8%, right? In 2016 it will be something less, let's say 7.5%, and next year it will be, let's say, 7.2, right? Next year it will be, let's say, 6.9. Next year it will be, let's say, 6.4, and so on and so forth. Students, are you getting me? So this is what deaccelerating or disinflation is, right? Is this clear? Right. So Zohan, you are asking if this will discourage investment. Uh, I mean, prices are still higher, but it can discourage investment. I totally got your point. It can discourage investment because of the fact that, again, it's not stable, right? I mean, you don't know, even though we can see a trend that each year rate of inflation is decreasing, but it's not very stable, right? So it's not like 7.4, 7.3, 7.1, 7.6, right? So it's still kind of, hard to predict. But yeah, prices are still increasing. Yes, do remember that. Yes, 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 yes. Students, that's a good question. So even in disinflation, students, please, 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 please listen to this carefully. In every type of inflation, prices will be increasing because the very definition of inflation is rise in prices. I repeat, in every type of inflation, prices will be increasing because the very definition of inflation is a rise in prices, right? But whether prices are increasing at an increasing rate or whether prices are increasing at a decreasing rate, that's what we need to understand. So in accelerating rate of inflation, which was this, prices were increasing at an increasing rate. Prices were increasing. Accelerating means you're accelerating, right, at an increasing rate. And disinflation means prices are increasing, but at a slower rate. So compared to last period, the increase in prices this year was less than last year. I mean, John, so for that example, I mean, there's no as such example for this, but you would need to look at the historic data of an economy, right? So if you gather Pakistan's, or any country's inflation data, right? And then you see what the pattern is. So if the rate of inflation over the time period that you're noticing it for, the rate every year is going up and it's higher than what the last year rate was, then it's accelerating. If over time the rate of inflation is decreasing and lower than what the previous year's rate was, then that will be called as disinflation. So you just need to look at the values to know exactly, right? Oh, okay, okay, okay. I got you. I got you. Okay. Now, students, that's an important, yes, yes, yes. That's an important thing. And I'm glad you brought this up. So let's do some calculations, right? Now I'll give you two examples, both of accelerating rate and decelerating rate, which is disinflation, right? Now students, think about this. Let's say this is the time period, and at the base year, which was 2017, right? So 2017 is your base year where we are recording our prices from, right? So price was 100 rupees, right? Now in this case, in let's say scenario one, right? So let me write this down over here. In scenario one, let's say it's accelerating rate of inflation. So it was 10%, then it was 12%, then it was, let's say, 15%, and then in the last year, let's say it was 20%. Is making sense? You can see clearly that the rate of inflation is increasing every year. Now in scenario two, let's say it's disinflation, which means every year inflation rate will decrease, right? So 10, then 8, then 6, and then 5. Got it? Okay. Now students, can you do the calculation for me? Now let's do it together, right? Now for this first scenario, compared to base year, in 2018, prices will be 10% higher. So in 2018, let me write those prices over here, right? So your prices will be 110. Easy. Then in 2019, you have to find 12% higher of this. What do you do? What do you need to do? 10% to, sorry, 12% higher of 110. So what you will do is that basically you will find this. What will you do? You will find this. Does anyone has a calculator? Or do you want me to do, right? So if you do that, right, is this making sense? If there's any confusion, students, please ask me, because on an exam, especially on MCQs, you get a lot of such questions. So that gives you 123.2. That gives you 123.2. So the new price level will be 123.2. Then next year, it will be 15% higher of what? Next year, it will be 15% higher of this value. Next year, it will be 15%. Students, are you following me or not? So you don't have to do 15% higher of 100. No. So 15% was the rate of inflation between 2019 and 2020. Therefore, when we want to calculate the price level of 2020, so it will be 15% higher of what the price level in 2019 was. So what you will do is you'll calculate this. Is making sense, students, right? So the next one turns out to be, let me do the calculation, right? 123, just a second, is it? 123.2 times 115 and divided by 100. So yeah, 141.68, absolutely correct. 141.68, and then next year you have to calculate 20% higher of this. So let's do this calculation so that we have something to compare. 68 into 20 divided by 100, right? So, sorry, my bad. 141.68 into 120 divided by 100. So that gives you 170 something, right? So 170. Okay. Now, if you calculate it, yeah, that's correct. So if you calculate it for the disinflation, right? So starting obviously was the same for both, right? So it will be, 100 to 110. It would be 110. Then next year, 8% higher of this. So what will this be? So it will be 110 into 108 divided by 100, right? So when you do this, you get 11 into 108 divided by, so because these zeros get cancelled out, so 11 times 108 divided by 10. So that gives you 118, 118.8, and then 6% higher of this. So it will give you 108, I'm sorry, 118.8 into 106 divided by 100. So that will give you 125.9. And then the last one will be 0.9 into 105 divided by 100. Are these correct values? 132.20, right? Is this correct, students? Okay, great, perfect. Okay, now students, think about this. Now, if you compare the pattern over here, so this is for the disinflation, this was for the disinflation, right? And this was for the accelerating rate of inflation. This was for the accelerating rate of inflation. Now you can see for yourself, starting point was the same. First year, both prices were at the same level. But within 1 to 3 years, within following 1 to 3 years, with accelerating rate, the price level reached to 170. Yes or no? Whereas with the disinflation, even though the price level did increase, it did increase, but it increased at a slower rate. Are you getting me? That's all what you need to remember. So in disinflation, prices will increase. It's not that prices will not increase, but prices will increase at a slower rate, right? Easy? Any confusion about this? Students, any confusion about this? Previous year, right? So what is disinflation? So disinflation is when the rate of inflation is lower in any given year compared to previous year. This is better than inflation as smaller in prices certain time period. Right, students, are you following this? So why is this better? So this is better than an accelerating rate of inflation as it results in smaller increases in prices during certain time period, as we just observed. Easy? Any confusion so far? Right? I mean, this is what creeping could be, right? Creeping is like increasing, but at a very slow rate, right? Now that creeping is that it's increasing, rate of inflation is increasing. It's almost, you can define creeping as stable rate of inflation, right? So compared to, last year, so let's say if last year inflation rate was 5%, next year it will be 5.1 or 5.2. I mean, the rate is going up, but it's increasing at a very slow rate, right? Are you getting me? So even though it will make it accelerating rate, but I mean, it's not that harmful. Zohan, does it make sense? Right? Okay. Now comes in, let's bring this at the end, right? So why am I bringing it towards the end? I'll tell you, right? Okay. Now, what is hyperinflation, right? So students, hyperinflation is what I told you about when we discussed monetary inflation. Now, what was monetary inflation, as we just discussed in today's class? That is when central bank prints a lot of currency notes, and therefore more money starts chasing fewer goods and services, and that results in hyperinflation. And I did tell you, I did give you some examples of that during World War, I guess, 1 or 2, Germany printed a lot of currency notes. Okay, so the class is about to end. So students, do you want to continue for a little bit more? If so, join the class with the same link. So what do you think? I mean, 10, 15 minutes should be enough. Okay, so students, join the class. Join the class with the same link, right? I'm about to end this.